morning everyone, welcome to this very important meeting of the Transport, Regen and Climate Policy Committee, where today we will be dealing with our local plan. If you are watching this morning, thank you for coming in, and we have a couple of members of the public in with us. It's good to see you too this morning. This meeting is held in public and will be webcast. We haven't received any petitions in relation to this item on the agenda, but we do have 6 questions from 2 members of the public, one who's notified that they're unable to attend, so we will be making sure they get a written response for that. The agenda and reports for today's meeting are all available on the Council's website, and all the paper copies have been distributed around the meeting already. Can I please request that mobile telephones and other equipment is switched off or on silent, please, so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting? And can we all note that there are no planned fire tests today, and if there is any emergency evacuation, please take instruction and follow the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Because we're in a sort of new format, rather than going round and introducing members and then officers, I'm going to go round, and so if you can all just make clear who you are and where you've come from as we go round. And I'll start with Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Bennett, Assistant Director of Legal and Governance.
Will Stewart, Director of Investment, Climate Change and Planning.
Kate Martin, Exec Director, City Futures Portfolio.
Christine Gilligan-Kubo, Deputy Chair of this committee and Hillsborough Ward Councillor.
Councillor Ruth Mercereau, City Ward Councillor and member of this committee.
Councillor Brian Lodge, member for Burnley Ward.
I'm Craig Gamble-Pugh, I'm Councillor for East Ecclesfield Ward.
Good morning, my name's Diane Hurst, I'm a member for Richmond Ward.
Morning, I'm Laura Stevens, Local Plan Team Lead in the Strategic Planning Team.
Michael Johnson, Head of Planning at the City Council.
Councillor Richard Shaw, Councillor for Beechford Greenhill Ward.
Councillor Ian Auckland, Councillor for Graves Park Ward.
Councillor Andrew Sanger, Councillor for Forward Ward and Lib Dem Group spokesperson on this committee.
Simon Vincent, Strategic Planning Service Manager.
Sarah Hyde, Democratic Services 2 Manager. Thank you everyone. Item 2 on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Mazza Iqbal. Do we have any other apologies, please?
There's no other apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3 is the exclusion of the press and public, which there are none. But can I just remind members of the committee, please, if you wish to discuss information in the restricted report, members of the public and press will kindly be asked to leave the meeting at this point, and the webcast will be halted. So if you could notify if that is going to happen, please, that would be appreciated. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Can I ask whether members have any declarations they wish to make, please? And item 5 is public questions and petitions. Mr. Clitheroe, I believe you have some questions you would like to ask.
Thank you for the opportunity to raise a couple of questions. First one that we had was, are members of the committee satisfied that the draft local plan makes sufficient provision for employment land?
Thank you. The draft plan identifies an employment land requirement for the plan period of 195.5 hectares across 17 years, representing 11.5 hectares per year. The draft plan identifies a supply that represents 13.4 years, which is only 3.6 years short of the plan period. Given that the plan will be reviewed within 5 years and the new sites are likely to come forward either through windfall permissions or by identifying new sites through churn, we consider that the level of supply will be sufficient to meet the needs over that plan period.
Thank you. Second one, the MPPF framework states that planning policies and decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt. And the planning policies and decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements of different sectors, including storage and distribution operations at a variety of scales and in suitably accessible locations. This is particularly pertinent given the significant need for storage and distribution facilities along the M1 corridor. Please can members of the committee identify where the suitably located storage and distribution sites are in the draft local plan?
Thank you. Any of the site allocations listed that are identified as potentially available for B8 development will be potentially suitable for storage and distribution. However, we recognise that some locations are more suited to logistics than others.
Thank you. It's evident from the draft local plan there is a shortfall in employment provision as recognised in the earlier statement, and this will be addressed through windfall and recycling of sites. Are members of the committee satisfied that this will create a strong and prosperous Sheffield economy?
The draft plan identifies an employment land supply, which I already mentioned, of 13.4 years, which is only 3.6 years short of the plan period. Given that the plan will be reviewed within 5 years and sites are likely to come forward, we consider that the level of supply will be sufficient to meet the needs over the plan period.
Thank you. In the endorsement of the publication draft Sheffield Local Plan document, there is reference to a Sheffield logistics study. Is this study publicly available and can it be shared?
Yes, this document will be available at the formal public consultation phase, which I believe is due to start at the beginning of January, somewhere around the 7th of January.
Okay, thank you. And a final question, can members of the committee please explain how sites have been identified and allocated and what the process is going forward?
Sites have been identified through a variety of sources: planning permissions, surveys, call for sites. The starting point is to assess whether the site comply with an overall spatial strategy agreed by the Cooperative Executive in February 2022. We also take account of the findings in documents such as the Employment Land Review in terms of the suitability of the site for different types of employment uses.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to raise questions.
Thank you. It's good of you to come in today. We do appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 6 on the agenda is the endorsement of the publication of the draft Sheffield Local Plan, which is pages 11 to 616 in the agenda pack. I'm not too sure who is starting us off with that one. Simon, I think it's over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start a presentation, which I think will be useful particularly for members of the public, but perhaps for members as well, in terms of providing a summary of the content of the report, appreciating it is a very long report and the plan itself is very long, so we thought it would be useful this morning to do a short presentation. But before I do that, I just wanted to draw members' attention to just a couple of amendments to the report and to the plan itself. So just first of all, in relation to the committee report itself, in paragraph 1.8.12, we refer to an employment land supply of 160.81 hectares of employment land. That should say 154 hectares, and that actually relates to the question, Chair, you just answered in relation to the 13.4 years supply. So 154 hectares represents 13.4 years supply. We don't think that materially changes the recommendations that we've made around employment land. That also results in a change to paragraph 3.14 in part 1 of the plan, again changing that figure of 160.81 to 154 hectares. The second change, which is a minor point really, which is in part 2 of the plan, in a paragraph 11.8 in the implementation section, there's reference there to the Enforcement Concordat. That has actually been now replaced by the Sheffield Enforcement Plan. This was just something we didn't pick up in editing. So there was an earlier draft which referred to the Enforcement Concordat, but it should refer to the Sheffield Enforcement Plan. So we're suggesting we would just make a change there just to reflect the most up-to-date position on enforcement. There is a further change to the report, but I'll pick that up at the end of the presentation. It relates to one of the recommendations, and it's just really a procedural matter in terms of this committee, so I'll pick that up at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Simon. Can I just ask, have the amendments been made on the website, on the information that has gone out to the public? Is that up to date, or will that be done?
They will need to be made. Yeah, they're changes that have only come to light in the last few days, so yeah, we will need to make those changes. Yeah. Okay, so the presentation this morning, there are a few things we want to cover. Obviously, there's a lot of content in the plan. We want to just start by giving a bit of background to the plan, talk about the comments that were made on the Sheffield Plan issues and options, which we consulted on in autumn 2020. So just highlighting some of the main points that were raised through that consultation. I'll just then run through what comprises the draft Sheffield Plan. It is a draft plan at this stage, but there are a number of documents that make up the Sheffield Plan. I'll talk about the overall vision, the aims and objectives of the plan, run through the overall growth plan, particularly around housing and employment, and then talk about the spatial strategy, so the strategy for accommodating the future growth over the next sort of 15 to 20 years. I'll then go on just to talk about the development management policies. The policies maps are displayed beautifully at the back of the room on the AO sheets there. The plan itself will be eventually be a digital map online, which will actually make it a lot easier to use for most people, I think. But we have printed off copies for the committee today. So I'll just say a little bit about that and the policy zones in the presentation. We then wanted to just highlight some of the issues around development viability and how, in coming to the policies within the plan, we've balanced competing priorities, particularly around affordable housing, carbon emissions, and accessible and adaptable housing. So they're all things that have an impact on the cost of development, and we want to just outline how we've balanced those competing priorities. I'll say a little bit about the consultation strategy, and then finish off by saying a bit about the next steps after public consultation and the route to adopting the plan probably towards the end of 2024. So the Sheffield Plan, once it's adopted, will become the city's statutory development plan. The plan covers the whole city, except for those areas in the Peak District National Park. So the Peak Park Authority produces its own plan for those areas that are in the Peak Park. The new plan will replace the Sheffield Core Strategy, which was adopted in 2009, as well as saved policies in what is now the very old Unitary Development Plan from 1998. There are a small number of policies, in fact 3 policies, relating to waste management in the Core Strategy, which will be retained following adoption of the Sheffield Plan, and that's pending a new South Yorkshire Joint Waste Management Plan. So the Sheffield Plan doesn't deal with waste management. That will be dealt with in a separate joint waste management plan produced with the other South Yorkshire local authorities. A reminder that consultation on the issues and options took place in 2020, and that was the stage really where we asked the public, developers, landowners, anyone with an interest in development in the city, what the plan should include. So we've reflected those comments in the content of the plan that's before you today. We held a number of member briefings in autumn last year on overall spatial options, which took place really sort of autumn 2021, early 2022, and that was really in response to changes to national policy, particularly around changes in the way housing need is calculated by the government. And following those briefing sessions last year and early this year, the Cooperative Executive agreed an overall spatial approach in February this year. So the publication draft plan, which is before you today, represents the Council's formal proposals on how the city should grow and develop in the period to 2039. I want to just talk briefly about what what people said in response to the issues and options consultation in 2020, and I've just sort of split this into two groups really. So comments first of all made by the public and voluntary organisations. Many people responded on this, felt that the housing target should be set locally rather than imposed by central government. Many people, and this was probably the most common comment that was made in response to the consultation, were against development on greenbelt land. There was strong support for reusing and redeveloping brownfield sites. Many people recognise that action needs to be taken on the climate and biodiversity emergencies. There were also many comments around the need for a better housing mix, and particularly the need for more affordable housing. There were concerns about the future of offices and shops in the city centre, reflecting no doubt the impact of the pandemic, but also changing shopping habits nationally. There was support for existing employment locations and broad support for better public transport, for active travel and for electric vehicle infrastructure. There were also comments made by developers, landowners and agents. Many of them argued that the housing target the city set should be much higher. They argued that greenbelt land should be released to meet the needs for new housing and to support economic growth. They also have concerns about the deliverability of brownfield sites, but many also highlighted the importance of the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District, or AMID, to the future economic prosperity of the city. So the document we've produced now responds to those comments that were made on the issues and options in autumn 2020. There are two main parts to the plan. Part one includes the vision, the spatial strategy, a series of sub-area policies and a list of site allocations. Part two, this includes the development management policies as well as a section on implementation. So this is the part two is the document that the council will use for helping us determine planning applications as they're received by the council in the future. Annex A provides more detail on the site allocations. So there's a schedule of sites, of all the sites there, listing conditions that will apply to the development of those sites. For example, things like protecting land for biodiversity or indicating the extent of the developable area of the site. There's an Annex B, which is the parking guidelines, which covers car parking in new developments as well as parking for disabled people and requirements for electric vehicle charging points. There's also a key diagram which is a representation of where the main growth is planned in the city over the next 15 to 20 years. There's the policies map, which I referred to earlier, displayed on the wall at the back of the room today. And perhaps uniquely, as far as I'm aware, that we have a glossary, which I think is quite important. This is a very technical document. It has to meet a variety of different sort of legal needs in terms of decisions the council is taking, and I think it's important that we make it as accessible as possible for the general public. So we have included quite an extensive glossary, which makes it easier for people to understand what we're talking about when we're using some of the technical terminology. But it also helps with consistency in terms of interpretation of the policies as well. The Sheffield Plan vision is that by 2039, Sheffield will be a fair, inclusive and environmentally sustainable city. It will be playing a nationally significant economic role at the heart of its region, with thriving neighbourhoods and communities, and have a distinct urban and rural identity. The vision is underpinned by 8 aims. I won't run through all these, but the 8 aims are set out there on the slide, but I just wanted to emphasise that the first 2 of those aims, a fair, inclusive and healthy city and an environmentally sustainable city, they have very strong relationships to all the other 6 aims, and I think they're a sort of cross-cutting theme which we aim to thread through the plan as a whole. The aims are supported by 25 objectives and they're grouped under each of the aims. I'm going to go on now just to say a bit about the overall spatial strategy and growth plan. So members, I'm sure, will recall that the Cooperative Executive agreed back in February an approach to growth within the city and the decision taken then was that growth should be largely restricted to the existing urban areas. Most of the land to be allocated should be previously developed or brownfield land. It was accepted, however, that some development on previously undeveloped or greenfield land in the urban areas will be acceptable in principle, and that was subject to sort of testing through a more detailed site selection process. Importantly, I think it was agreed that Greenbelt release will be limited to a small number of sustainably located, previously developed brownfield sites. In fact, there's a single large brownfield site at Norton Aerodrome, the former Norton Aerodrome site, proposed for housing in the plan. But members also agreed there should be no release of greenfield sites in the Greenbelt. I think it's important perhaps to stress the benefits of the spatial strategy, and I think I've highlighted there at the top of this slide the importance of this strategy in responding to the climate and biodiversity emergencies. Very clearly there was a conscious decision by members, by the cooperative executive, to limit outward expansion of the urban areas and a drive to raise overall densities in the existing built-up areas. It was agreed that a major focus on regeneration and growth within the central area was really important for the future of the city, with the aim of creating new, vibrant, sustainable neighbourhoods with a better housing mix in those areas. The other important strand here as well is the idea that we create a series of 20-minute neighbourhoods. Sometimes referred to as 15-minute neighbourhoods or 20-minute neighbourhoods. We've referred to them in the plan as 20-minute neighbourhoods, and the idea is that you focus communities around where they can access their everyday local needs and facilities within a sort of 10-minute walk or cycle ride from where they live, and that's really important in terms of reducing the need to travel. So you're talking about sort of 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back, which is why we describe them as 20-minute neighbourhoods. I think there are a number of key benefits to this strategy, most importantly really in terms of reducing travelling distance, particularly from the suburbs to the centre, reducing dependency on the private car, which helps us reduce carbon emissions, it helps reduce congestion and leads to less air pollution, provides more opportunities to walk and cycle, and I think the densification of the urban area is also important in improving the viability of shops, local facilities and public transport. But it also has the benefit, obviously, of protecting the countryside, the biodiversity and green character. And really, Sheffield does have the reputation as the outdoor city and is known for its sort of green frame around the existing urban areas. But all these things also help in terms of health, promoting more active travel, but also improving air quality. Moving on to employment land, need and supply. We've made reference to this a little earlier, but the updated employment land review carried out by consultants Litchfields in 2021 identified a need of between 8.8 and 12.1 hectares of employment land per year. The recommended target by the consultants, which we've included in the plan, is 11.5 hectares per year, and that aligns with the level of jobs growth proposed in the Sheffield City Region Strategic Economic Plan, which we estimate should deliver around 2,550 additional jobs per year on average. The figure of 11.5 hectares per year assumes that 4.23 hectares per year is needed to replace employment land that's lost to other uses, so every year some employment land is redeveloped for things like housing. But that means that overall, including that replacement of land lost to other uses, that over the plan period we need 195.5 hectares of employment land. The current identified supply is 154 hectares or 13.4 years, but we believe that windfalls and churn within existing employment areas will generate additional land which can be brought forward either as windfalls or as future allocations in future reviews of the plan. And that should meet any shortfall to 2039. On housing need, this is where we had a lot of debate with members last year through the transitional committees and then through the cooperative executive. members, I'm sure, will recall that in December 2020, the government altered its standard methodology for calculating housing need, increasing the housing need figure for the 20 largest urban centres in England by 35%. And the current figure for Sheffield, based on the latest affordability ratios, which are used in the methodology, would mean that Sheffield's need is 3,018 homes a year. There's also a need for 50 homes per year to replace those lost through demolition or conversion to other uses. So if the council had supported the standard methodology, we would needed to have provided over 52,000 new homes in the city. This was obviously a concern to members, and the council commissioned some demographic modelling, which was published in 2021, which shows that actually Sheffield needs to be building somewhere between about 2,000 and 2,300 homes per year to support the Strategic Economic Plan jobs growth target. So that's important. So that range has been really important in determining what we think is appropriate for Sheffield. So the requirement proposed in the Sheffield plan is 2,100 homes per year. That includes the replacement allowance, and that gives a total requirement of 35,700 homes over the period 2022 to 2039. That land supply, to meet that requirement, will come through a number of ways, a number of means. First of all, there are quite a lot of sites that already have planning permission. There are a small number of sites that are nearing completion, which we haven't proposed as allocations, but they would provide 630 additional homes. Then there are a whole lot of sites which are partially under construction or not yet started. They would provide over 12,000 homes. Proposed allocated sites within the plan that don't yet have planning permission provide nearly 15,000 homes. And then we've also made some assumptions about housing that's likely to come forward in what we've described as broad locations for growth. So areas like parts of the Lower Don Valley, parts of the Upper Don Valley, the Sheaf Valley, where there's already land transitioning from employment use to housing in some of those areas, where we expect additional windfalls or future allocations to come forward at a rate on average of about 275 homes a year. We also make a small sites allowance, and this is backed up by long-term trends in terms of windfalls on small sites, and we think it's reasonable to make an allowance of 200 homes per year on small sites. So that's how we get to the total supply of 35,700. Just a brief word about gypsy and traveller sites. We know this is sometimes controversial, but we're proposing one gypsy and traveller site at Eckington Way, which will accommodate households that meet the planning definition of gypsies and travellers. So those are gypsies and travellers who travel as part of their sort of daily life. They have a sort of nomadic lifestyle. Not all travellers travel, but many do live in mobile homes or caravans. Other need will be met through, on small sites, will be met through planning applications as sites are identified. This next slide just shows the distribution of the supply on sites with permission and the proposed allocated sites. So this doesn't include windfalls, and so you can see here that obviously a very large percentage of the new housing is proposed within the central area of Sheffield. Some housing in all the other sub-areas, which will be topped up, if you like, by windfalls in those areas, so that they're not absolute figures. This is just a supply based on identified sites, but certainly well over half the housing that we expect to deliver in Sheffield is likely to be should be within the central area. Just a word about transport. So this is really important in sort of connecting up the development sites that are proposed in the plan. Our ambition set out in the strategic policies is for future travel patterns to be characterised by a sustainable, integrated and effective decarbonised network. The plan prioritises initiatives and schemes in accordance with those set out in both the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority Transport Strategy and the Sheffield Transport Strategy. So the plan very much aligns with existing strategies around transport. On national and regional, So at a national and regional level, rail infrastructure investment is prioritised. For example, the regeneration of Sheffield Midland Station and electrification of the Midland Main Line. At the city region level, the ambition is to secure the long-term future of the tram network and enhance and expand that network where viable. There's also a priority to open the Barrow Hill railway line from Sheffield to Chesterfield, potentially with new stations at Waverley and Bayton. And at the local level, the plan identifies and prioritises the delivery of 7 mass transit corridors where particular investment will go into providing not only support for public transport, but also better active travel and as well as options for complementary park and ride infrastructure. I think one of the things the plan and also the transport strategies want to see is a step change in the provision of new high-quality cycle routes and networks across the city. So that's just a very sort of quick overview of some of the main sort of strategic policies. I want to go on now and just briefly talk about the development management policies and how we've balanced different priorities. First of all, just a mention of the policies map again. So that rather like the unitary development plan, which identified a whole series of policy areas across the city, so every bit of the district, the local planning authority area, is shaded into one of these different, very pretty pattern, these very pretty shades on the policies map, which zone the whole of the city into one of these different zones. And what that enables us to do is set a menu of preferred, acceptable, and unacceptable uses for most of those zones. The site allocations overlay the policy zones, and what this approach does is provide both certainty and flexibility. So the allocations provide certainty for developers about where we want development to happen, but the policy zones also provide flexibility and enable us to deal with windfall sites or applications that come forward unexpectedly in the future. So there's a framework for guiding decisions in those policy zones. Moving on to development viability and how we've balanced the competing priorities. I'll run through this fairly quickly, but there are a number of policies within the plan that impact on the cost of development. We've commissioned a whole plan viability appraisal, which will be published alongside the plan for consultation. And that's sets out the assumptions that have been made in that appraisal. So SILT contributions, the community infrastructure levy, effectively a sort of development tax which is used to fund new infrastructure in the city, that will continue at current rates. There is an assumption that typically section 106 legal contributions towards things like open space, health facilities and education facilities will be at an average rate of about £1,500 per dwelling. There are some things which are coming in nationally, which will impact on the cost of development, which have been factored into the appraisal. So biodiversity net gain it will become a mandatory requirement from November 2023. This is a requirement introduced by the Environment Act from last year. Electric vehicle charging points will also become mandatory. And then there are some things within the plan that we're introducing. So green roofs will be required subject to feasibility on residential developments comprising 10 or more dwellings in a single block, so essentially apartment blocks. And also for non-residential developments of more than 1,000 square metres gross internal floor space. We have a policy which limits wholesome water use in new buildings to 110 litres per person per day. And we expect sustainable drainage systems in all new developments where feasible. The plan proposes the adoption of national space standards for new homes. The national space standards were published several years ago, but until they're confirmed within a local plan, we haven't been able to apply those. So the new plan will enable us to apply the national space standards, so that's quite important. And then there are 3 things which we've mulled over quite a bit with members, discussing the priorities. And these 3 items on this slide are the things which really are most costly for developers to deliver. So first of all, on accessible and adaptable homes, the government has said that it does intend to make all homes make it a requirement for all homes to be accessible and adaptable. That essentially means that built to more generous space standards that allow disabled people to access and move around the homes more easily. Regardless of whether the government brings that in or not, the plan will require 100% accessible and adaptable homes in schemes up to 49 new homes. For larger developments, 2% of the homes will also need to be wheelchair adaptable or accessible, and that's on schemes of 50 or more new homes. On carbon reduction and sustainable design, the plan proposes a 75% reduction in CO2 emissions from 1st of January 2025. So any development, any applications received from that date will need to deliver a 75% reduction in CO2 emissions compared to the 2013 building regulations. And the plan, in line with the Council's commitment to be net zero carbon from 2030, proposes that a development should be net zero carbon from the 1st of January that year, and that's an important commitment to align with the commitments the Council's already made. On affordable housing, we're proposing a 30% requirement subject to viability in the southwest, south and northwest sub-areas, and a 10% requirement subject to viability in all other areas. On tenure mix, we're required for the first 25% of all new affordable homes have to be first homes, which is essentially a discounted market product, and the government requires that the first 25% of affordable homes to be first homes. But then in Sheffield, the advice from the viability consultants is that we can reasonably expect to deliver 25% social rented housing and 50% affordable or intermediate products. So recognising there are a range of different affordable housing products, and they do cost different amounts to deliver in terms of what it costs a developer to build and sell those homes. Just briefly, last couple of slides really on public consultation next steps. So first of all, on public consultation, the standards for how we will consult on the draft plan are set out in the Statement of Community Involvement, which was published in July 2020. This requires a consultation for a minimum of 6 weeks, and that will run from the 9th of January to the 20th of February. We are asking members to approve or endorse the consultation strategy, which is attached as an appendix to the report. I think it's important that we stress the purpose of this consultation. So this consultation is about whether the plan is sound. And now in planning terms, those soundness tests are set out in national planning policy, in the National Planning Policy Framework. So the plan has to be positively prepared, which means planning for the levels of growth that the city needs. It has to be justified, which means we have to provide evidence to support the growth and the policies within the plan. It has to be effective, which means it has to be economically viable, and it has to be consistent with national planning policy, particularly the National Planning Policy Framework. Any amendments the Council wishes to make in response to representations have to be submitted to the government with the draft plan. So the Council can't just alter the plan and submit it. The amendments have to be submitted with the draft plan. If those amendments are substantive in terms of changing the content, then we may not be able to submit the plan based on the timetable we've proposed, and we would need to do some further consultation. But essentially, it will be down to the planning inspector to make a decision on whether to accept any proposed amendments the Council wishes to propose. And the planning inspector will publish a list of recommended main modifications in their preliminary report. Those main modifications will be subject to further public consultation before the plan can be adopted. And the plan gains more weight in planning decisions as it progresses towards adoption. So it starts to become a material consideration, but as it goes through the process, and if there's been no objection to particular policies, then those policies will carry more weight in planning decisions. In terms of sort of next steps and timetable, this is the timetable as set out in the most recent local development scheme from autumn 2021. So this shows actually a consultation starting on the draft plan starting in October this year. So we are going to be consulting slightly later than is shown on this timetable. So that does mean that submission is also likely to be a little later than shown on here, but we will aim to catch up time where we can. And we do believe that ultimately there will be opportunities to save time during the examination process, which is quite lengthy, as you can see there on row B. So we expect to receive the final inspector's report around September 2024, and the plan will be finally adopted at the end of that year. Finally, just on the recommendations, I won't run through all these, but just to flag, I mentioned that right at the beginning that there was a change to one of the recommendations, and this is really a procedural thing that really this committee needs to recommend that in due course full council delegates authority to the Chief Planning Officer. So for approving any non-material amendments to the publication draft plan. And we recommend that's done in consultation so with the chair of the committee, with the deputy chair and the spokesperson as well. But it's really just a procedural thing that it's not really for this committee to approve that delegation. That would be a matter for full council. So it's just a slight variation to that recommendation. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry it went on a while, but hopefully that was useful to members in getting a feel for the content of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think you've very eloquently and very clearly walked us through what is a very long and complicated set of documents. So not only thank you for that, for putting it into very basic plain English so that everyone who's listening could understand where we are and the detail of the plan, but also thank you, I think I can say on behalf of all of the committee, to yourself and all the team for all the hard work that you've done. It's taken us a while to get here, but you have done a really good job, so thank you all very much for that. Before I open for members' questions, Michael or Ray, is there anything you would like to add?
No, Chair, not at this stage, thank you.
Okay, any questions, please? We'll start. Councillor Gilligan, then Councillor Gamble.
I don't think mine's really a question, it's clarification. I'm just thinking about the green roofs, which I fully support. Will they come in conflict with solar panels, or will that be under the feasibility assessment?
Chair, one of the elements of that policy is when it's viable and practical. So it will be part of considerations for individual developments where a green, blue or brown roof might be appropriate. It might be deemed more appropriate for another reason to put panels on roofs and different things. So it will be a case by case basis, really.
Thank you. Mine isn't a question, it's just some observations, really. I think one of the things I'm most proud about as an elected member of this local authority is that we declared a climate emergency and that we've set that very clear policy to reach net zero carbon by 2030. But the building standards that are outlined in this policy are stated, this is on page 30, paragraph 1911, are saying that we won't require developments to achieve net zero until January 2030. So we can't possibly deliver on net zero if between now and January 2030 we're allowing buildings and developments and homes to go up which are going to continue to emit carbon. So effectively we would be abandoning our net zero 2030 policy. So I would just question whether this is actually the will of this committee of strategy and resources in a full council, because I think the will of elected members has been very clearly set out. I understand, and through briefings, I appreciate from responses from officers previously, a little of the complexities of how the government will need us to demonstrate that the plan is deliverable and feasible. So we have to do what we can in the timescale that we can. But ultimately, I don't see that it's feasible for us to carry on permitting polluting, carbon-emitting developments in order to meet the housing needs of the current generation if that means that we're then essentially pulling the plug on longer term sustainability of future generations. I also noticed that there's a definition of net zero on page 226, which doesn't have a citation. And I just think that it seems like quite a limited definition. It describes it in terms of the use of the buildings once they're built, so it doesn't reflect or measure the embodied carbon, e.g. the materials that are used in the construction or the methodology. So I think if we're going to be genuinely looking to achieve net zero, we need to be, there's a big difference between whether you build buildings out of timber or concrete, for example, and we need to reflect that in our policy framework. On page 46, paragraph 447, there is a statement that says that if we move more quickly towards requiring net zero in our planning framework, that we run the risk of not being able to develop sufficient affordable or wheelchair and accessible homes. I'm curious to know more, and I think we should revisit that. I think there is a very clear relationship between whether a home or a building or a business place is built to be sustainable in terms of its energy use and whether it's affordable. And also, politically, I don't like the idea that there's a choice between providing people with either homes that you can afford or homes that you can afford to heat, or homes that you can physically access. I think we need to be making sure that wheelchair accessible homes are also sustainable and also are affordable. It's not one or the other. In summary, I'm just really worried that within that detail of this plan, there's a huge contradiction with established council policy. I think it's really excellent that there are 90 references to carbon reduction, 94 references to climate change in the documents that have been supplied to us. I can see the thread running throughout, but in that detail, I see it as being an enormous contradiction between a set of policies that we're being asked to introduce and a set of policies that we've been working to for quite some time. And I would just say that I think we should be asking strategy and resources to have another look at that as part of the process going forward. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. I think listening to the comment sort of emphasises the complexity really around the balances that the plan tries to make across the things that we've talked about, affordable housing and the point taken in relation to affordability versus what a net zero home does in terms of affordability to run that home. So there's some really difficult balances that we've wrestled with as officers, and I know through member briefings we've had the opportunity to talk to members about. The plan, as we've discussed, needs to be deliverable, and therefore it needs to be demonstrated that what's in there is viable. And from our point of view, it does need to try to tread a difficult balance between key council priority and policy, and that is around sort of affordable housing, and we've talked around how the plan is delivering on affordable housing across the whole city in comparison to existing plans, and how the plan actually starts to insist on social rented housing as part of that mix. Now, to achieve that, we don't feel that it's viable and even setting that aside, there's challenges around viability and net zero right now, and I don't think any local authority or local planning authority would want to write a local plan that didn't hit net zero right now if it was deliverable. What we're saying at this point in time is that we've set a trajectory that aligns with the council's trajectory in terms of when it really is seeing a city that's a net zero city, to make sure that the policy and the plan aligns with that target. But we've certainly heard, and I don't disagree with the principles that you've said, that there are challenges in that narrative, and there's challenges in the way that the plan can be read and the balance of the policies can be seen. But certainly that's why we've put the policies and the narrative as we've put it. I don't know, Chair, if Simon wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think only that what the advice from the viability consultants was that achieving the future home standard, which would come in potentially in 2025 under government proposals, and effectively is what we're proposing to apply in the local plan, whether the government brings it in or not, because the government could change its mind about what it's proposing there. But that standard would add typically around 11% to the cost of building a house. So that then has a knock-on effect for how many affordable homes that the developer could afford to provide. Now, we know that technology is changing all the time, and the expectation is that by 2025, air source heat pumps in particular will be a lot cheaper than they are now, typically. So it will be a case of keeping this under review. The plan itself will be reviewed before 2030, and we will look at viability again at that point. But at the moment, we can't say for certain that we could go to 2030, the sort of 2030 net zero target more quickly. We would, I think the advice from the viability consultants is that would have a significant impact on the number of affordable homes that could be delivered in the city.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the responses. The reason I specifically said at the outset that I wasn't asking a question was because the answers have been provided previously and have been heard and understood. So my purpose for raising those points was to just emphasise, for the benefit of other elected members on this committee and on other committees of the council, that we have a responsibility in terms of exerting political leadership and setting policy to really understand very clearly that if what we're being told now is that, sorry, for very, very good legal and financial reasons, we've had some external consultants who've said you can't have net zero by 2030. We need to understand the implication if that's what we're taking on. And if that's not politically acceptable to us as elected members of the council, we need to push it back once more. And that's what I'm asking Strategy and Resources to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Shaw, then Councillor Auckland, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been delving through some more of the detail towards the back of the pack. On page 3 of 3, regarding policy CO2 parking provision, on point D it says car and cycle parking must be secure and appropriate design, suitable for the use and location, and be accessible and convenient for all users. Now, my attention was drawn recently to a case where someone wanted to get a cycle storage shed in their front garden because they couldn't get it in the house, and they were turned down because it was not in keeping with the general area. But if they wanted a bin store or something like that, that would have been fine. Now, I believe other local authorities, I think Leicester, have recently changed their planning rules to clarify that, if you want to, get rid of your car or something and have some parking for your bike outside in your front garden, then that's allowed. Just wonder if officers could clarify whether this plan or maybe a supplementary policy would allow that here in Sheffield. And then my second slightly related point is comparing the cycle and car provisions in the regulation. So for instance, in secondary schools, it says 1 car space per 1 to 6 staff on page 566 of the pack. But on page 570 for secondary schools, it says 1 cycle space per 8 staff and 1 per 8 students. Oh, I don't think that's consistent with the target set by this council, the combined authority, for a target of 20% of short journeys to be made by cycle. So I think that 1 in 8 isn't 20%. So given that a single car parking space has is equivalent to 14 cycle spaces, I was just wondering if that number could be a bit more ambitious. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, in relation to the first question, obviously I don't know that particular case. there's policies within the local plan that talk around design standards and design quality and development fitting in with the local area, and there's always a balance between what somebody wishes to build and where they wish to build it and what they wish to build it out of as well, and the appropriateness of the need, and those two things need to be balanced up. In the case you're describing it, it sounds like the aesthetic outweighed the need, if you like. There's nothing within this plan that other than to promote the provision of secure cycle parking that would suggest that it wouldn't be acceptable in principle, subject to the quality of the structure, to put something in front of the front elevation of a dwelling house. But there'll be cases, conservation areas for example, where it might be less appropriate than other settings. So it would, I don't want to call it a classic planning phrase, but it would be about each case on its merits really. One thing that this plan does that we haven't had previously is it sets a clear definition of what secure cycle parking is, and that's something that's caused us problems with planning application in the past, really frustrating problems actually, where people have put up wooden structures with no roofs and no lockable structures within them. So actually they've not been used very well. So what we get to do within this plan is set a better standard around what we mean by secure. In terms of the parking standards you're talking about around schools, we've taken them from our colleagues in transportation in terms of the standards that they have. But we can take that away and have a conversation with our colleagues in transportation and see whether we want to, they would support, and we would be able to come back with an amendment to the content for the Strategy and Resources Committee to look at those standards around cycle parking.
Is that okay?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there's on the kind of the aesthetics of a bin store or something. I mean, if someone had got bought a clapped out old van and put that in their front garden and put their bike in there, that would be fine. But that's not really covered by the aesthetic restrictions. But like a plastic or a metal purpose designed shed. In the case I'm thinking of, that was turned down. So it's a bit strange that we allow some things that aren't in keeping with a conservation area, but others not.
I think it might be worth having a conversation outside just about that particular case and see if there's any room for manoeuvre or whatever. Is that okay? And then we've got Councillor Auckland, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, just by way of a comment, we've had a lot of briefing on the plan, so we've got a lot of documentation in front of us, and we've had a good presentation. I don't know if we've got thousands of people viewing it, but there's a lot to give justice to. But I'd just like to make an assurance, I think, that we've all had a lot of information as this process has gone through, and having been here a while, I think this is a better job than some of the previous efforts that we've had over the years. So, just a couple of things. Norton Aerodrome, allocation of housing there. It's a step on to make an allocation in the green belt. I've always argued no, not leave the green belt alone. We have a need for housing. We have young people who need to get on the housing ladder. We need to provide a variety of tenures. I've come to the view that in the end, the aerodrome is a perfect site that's capable of development, making our plan aspirations and still providing protection for the green belt. But I am disappointed then, having done all of that, to have got to a relatively low allocation of housing on that site, just outside my ward. And I just wonder if officers can rehearse that yet again and say what the strength of advice is behind coming up with that particular figure, and how sound that might be. And then an unashamable local plug Chair, from page 154, which is a designation of a local green space. Now, there is a bit of woodland, a highly treasured green space in Greves Park Ward, Bolehill Woods, and local people got together following some sale of the land to produce a plan for a local green space designation, which is very close, or the equivalent of green belt designation. And I think we would like to commend the people who've put this plan together. So this was all local effort, produced a very good document, I think. And I just wonder if officers think that this could provide if the policy change provides a template for more of this work to be undertaken to protect local green spaces. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, just in terms of Norton first, that capacity has been reached, as capacity has been reached across the city on sites looking at constraints such as ecology. And obviously the part of Norton, well, the old aerodrome is the site itself. When that site's been looked at in the past, potentially it's been looked at with fields that are set further away from, I don't know whether the north or south, but certainly further away from the principal road. Now that is greenfield, greenbelt. So that site as an allocated site is constrained by those elements, which is why we've got the number that we've got to. I mean, 270 is still a good healthy number for the types of homes that site can deliver. In relation to the second point, I'll pass to Simon if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were really impressed by the submissions that the local community group made in terms of the evidence for the Bolehill Woods local green space designation. I think it's a really good model of how to produce evidence to support a case for a designation in a plan, and we'd certainly be directing other groups who might want to protect a local green space in their area or make the case for a local green space designation to use that as a model for how they could bring additional sites forward. I mean, obviously, there will be an opportunity for groups to make representations as part of the public consultation, and if something is if additional sites are put forward, we can consider those, and they would need to be submitted to the inspector at this stage as proposed amendments to the plan.
Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair, and clearly want to put on record my thanks to the officers for getting us this far in terms of this draft. I mean, clearly a lot of work has gone in over the last 2 years, and I think it's been a really good process in terms of the members' working group and then the briefing to the political groups. So my first question is really in terms of timescale, because I want a plan adopted as soon as possible. When you're talking about end of 2024, and you're saying that in that slide that was presented that we're already going to go out to the next stage of public consultation a couple of months later than expected, but we could catch up during the examination stage. I mean, is that as achievable as the commentary suggested?
Thanks, Chair. I think it will depend to a large extent on how many representations are received during the public consultation period, and whether that leads us to propose more significant amendments. But I think inevitably there will be challenge from landowners, from developers, from site promoters, and that will lead to probably some lengthy hearing sessions at the examination. It will depend. We are to some extent in the hands of the planning inspectorate. Once we submit the plan, the inspector will sort of set a timetable. There will be a preliminary session where the inspector sets out any concerns they may have at that stage, and I think at that point we'll have a better idea of whether there would be any likely delay to the timetable. But I think we've allowed a fairly generous period for that examination period that we showed on the slide is about 18 months. Typically these things can take anywhere between 12 and 24 months. So, we were slightly on the cautious side, so we think that there could be some scope to catch up a month or two there.
Thank you. As I say, I'm just very keen, having been here as a new councillor when the UDP was adopted, never expected it. It's bits of it's to still be in place 25 years later, because clearly, quite rightly, the council's moved on, but government planning policy's moved on. Just so 3 sets of questions. So very pleased that Dore Village got their neighbourhood plan adopted. Very pleased that BBest got theirs adopted for a referendum. Disappointed at how difficult that process has been. And yes, I clearly want a city plan, but I also like the opportunity of resident groups being able to set up what's right for their area in terms of a complementary neighbourhood plan. What scope do you see this plan has in terms of making the process easier for other neighbourhood groups to adopt neighbourhood plans, or put forward neighbourhood plans for adoption?
Chair, I think first thing to say is we agree it's very complicated to get a neighbourhood plan in place, and it's a labour of love from the community that does that. And you know, we've been extremely impressed with the dedication of the 2 communities, and particularly a group of individuals that have pushed the 2 neighbourhood plans forward that we've got. Government have come out and said that they want to make it easier, so we'll have to wait and see what that means. And obviously, if that is the case, then hopefully we'll see more in Sheffield, because that's what we want to see. In terms of how the local plan can help, well, it sets certainty in relation to expectations and allocations within areas, which means that starting point is going to be easier for neighbourhood groups. Obviously, neighbourhood plans will then take account of the desires of those groups and those neighbourhoods, but certainly there's a better starting point there. I think from our point of view as a service, we've got some dedicated capacity, although there's been some mitigating circumstances around that post recently. There is dedicated capacity within the service to help support those plans coming forward as well. So too complicated at the moment, and certainly not as many as we would have wanted to see, but hopefully we see that process getting easier, and certainly the plan being in place will make that easier.
Dare I ask, has the government given us a timescale by which they will make them easier, or is that just too hard to understand?
No comment, Chair.
Absolutely. So yeah, you know, I hear what we're saying, but very, very keen to support other groups who want to go down that route. But at the moment, it is, as you say, a challenging, lengthy process. So just in terms of ES2 and ES3, in terms of wood burning, and clearly there's an air quality challenge, which to the city if we encourage wood burning and wood pellet burning. But there's also a sustainability process if everybody goes down it, because the UK is probably not sustainable in terms of. So are we encouraging wood burning, wood pellet too much, given the previous point about the drop? One of the key drivers of this is about a 2030 zero carbon target, and do we actually want to be importing lots of wood for burning?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think there is other legislation that runs alongside the planning legislation which sort of helps us with this, but the policy ES5 in the draft plan on managing air quality is relevant here. So that sets out that air quality impact assessments are required for developments over a certain size threshold, and that would also apply to any industrial activity that's covered under the pollution prevention and control regulations. So developments would have to, anything, let's say a pellet burning power station, for example, would have to comply with that legislation. So there's that other layer of legislation which runs alongside the planning legislation. So I think that's how we would see that being controlled.
Okay, because I mean, we've all heard about the Drax example. Clearly, we're not going to build a mini Drax, but not only is the carbon capture storage unit not yet operational, despite the government saying it was going to happen 5-6 years ago, but also we're importing large amounts of wood from Canada and the United States. So in terms of hot food takeaways, where did this figure of 800 metres from a secondary school come from? And it seems to me quite restrictive. I think the whole policy in terms of NC12 seems to be saying that hot food hot food takeaways are necessarily bad for secondary age young people. I know I have lots of residents of mine who are, university students who clearly go to takeaways that are within 800 metres of various secondary schools, and it seems strange. It seems a very restrictive policy, and I just wondered where the 800 metres came from as a figure.
Yeah, I mean, this policy has really come out of quite extensive discussions we've had with public health colleagues and the concerns that they have about obesity levels particularly within secondary school, but also primary school pupils as well. But obviously, at secondary school level, pupils, are more independent, can leave the school grounds very often, sometimes at lunchtimes or certainly after school. And I think the 800-metre distance is a judgment, but it essentially represents a 10-minute walk. Now, as a guide, we've relied on work that was done quite some time ago now about distances people will typically walk to access public transport. So it's using that as a guide, really. So research has shown previously that people will walk 5 minutes to a bus stop, or they'll walk 10 minutes to a train station or a tram stop. So those are the sorts of thresholds we've used in other policies, the distances that people are typically prepared to walk. So our judgment is that secondary school pupils would generally not walk more than 10 minutes. It's a judgment, and it's striking a balance between the flexibility to provide locations for hot food takeaways, but also supporting the council's public health objectives around obesity, really.
Chair, just to touch on that briefly, it is a recognised policy in other local plans, but certainly we did want to try and strike that balance in this policy. I know at one point the conversation was whether actually there should be more of a blanket ban, and one thing we definitely didn't want to do is just do a complete blanket ban on new takeaways, for example. So we tried to build flexibility in the policy by introducing hours of operation to make sure that the limitations related to school opening hours, rather than do something with a greater breadth to it. So we did try to strike that balance between the sort of the commercial needs of an operation and the wider needs of a community versus bringing some public health controls in relation to the particular issue.
I'm really grateful that the 20-minute neighbourhood has been adopted in terms of this plan. I just think that neighbourhoods can include takeaways, and that can be hot food, and that hot food can be of high quality. I remain concerned about what we're saying here about we're effectively saying hot food takeaways are something for the evening, and we're saying for those where we've got a concentration of hot food takeaways, that they're going to be gradually reduced. And I put on the table the example of Broom Hill, where clearly lots of people access Broom Hill takeaways from within 800 metres. There are a number of schools within 800 metres, but those takeaways are not necessarily targeting the 11 to 16 market. And I'm just concerned of the unintended consequences of this policy. So I do think we should reflect on this particular policy.
Just to come back on that just briefly, the things that Councillor Sangor has talked about are the things that we tried to strike a balance with. So, I mean, perhaps we will go away and look at it again, but we have looked at it quite closely, because what we don't want this policy to say is that hot food takeaways are an enemy, because they're certainly not, and they're an inherent part of a sustainable community. And, this possibly this narrative goes back to Jamie Oliver times, if you like, in terms of the narrative at hot food takeaways at that point in time. And I don't think that's relevant. I think the world has moved on from that, and this policy tries to strike that public health balance versus making sure that existing hot food takeaways in communities and new hot food takeaways can come forward in communities, but with some controls around hours of operation in particular. So it was designed, as Councillor Sangos sort of more eloquently sort of identified then, in terms of the purposes of striking that balance between a sustainable neighbourhood but also trying to strike a public health balance. So we'll certainly go away and take a look at the content again.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hurst, please.
Thank you, Chair. Comment and a question. First of all, comment. Thank you very much to officers for bringing us all along on the journey that we've been on so far. I think Ian touched on this earlier, but over the last few months we've had a series of informal drop-in sessions, meetings, briefings, discussions, and really unpicked some of the content and subject matter of this document. And it has helped me to come and sit here today and think, well, actually, I know what they're going to be talking about. I'd be interested to hear how it's presented and where it's going next, but I'm qualified. I'm not qualified, but I'm at least halfway competent to make a decision on that. So thank you very much for all the hard work that you've put in so far and the very structured process. The question is around, I'm moving it on from the subject matter of the plan to the consultation, because you set out a very comprehensive and clear consultation strategy, which looks at giving people a range of opportunities through drop-in sessions and meetings and online briefings and setting up a portal and things like that. So I'm just considering that and thinking how resource intensive that is. And so 2 questions out of that. Have you got the resources you need to do that? There will be no lack of interest in the forthcoming Sheffield plan, that's for sure. But do you have the resources you need to actually do that and analyse the material that comes out of it and take through any recommendations or amendments that come from that? And have you got in mind a series of events or frameworks so that you're going to be where people are, or particularly given the local transport crisis that we're having at the moment, can get to, so that they can come and look and converse and have that range of options open to them to engage with the plan production process? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try and answer that as best as I can. Yes, it's a really good question about our resources. When we were drafting the consultation strategy, we really had that in mind, because it's like with so many things to do with the local plan, it's a balance, isn't it? It's balance about getting to the right people in the right way at the right time, but also doing that in such a way that we can manage to do it properly. Yes, I think that the strategy that we set out is one that we can manage within our resources, although obviously it's always going to be a stretch. And we do have, fortunately, colleagues elsewhere within the council who will be able to support us with some of those aspects, particularly in adjacent teams who also reflect the sort of the work of the local plan. In terms of the events that we've got in mind, yes, obviously we've been thinking about whether people can access those and also where the majority of our development lies. So we've taken on board comments that we've had from discussions with members and our local area committees, and as well as internal conversations. And we're looking at a number of events, drop-in events in the city centre, but in addition to that, we will hold similar events in more outlying areas of the city, particularly where there are higher levels of development, for example, in the far north, that sounds terrible, in the north, for example, Stocksbridge, or the southeast, which are physically further from the city centre. We've also taken on board the fact that the local area committee meetings during that time of the year aren't necessarily in the areas of the local areas which have got the most development coming forward, or where there might be the most interest. So what we will aim to do there is to use that to influence where our locations are, I suppose, to make sure that we've got as good coverage as we can, and also use those local area committee pre-planned timed sessions to provide a more informal drop-in service before those sort of general business meetings that might help people who wouldn't normally attend those meetings to come and chat with us as well. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
I don't have anybody else indicate. Oh, sorry, Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
It's specifically about the recommendations. So when we move on to take those, if I can speak then.
Councillor Sango.
Sorry, are we on to comments rather than questions now? Thanks, Chair. Clearly very pleased that we've got a document in front of us. And I think those of us who worked in terms of the heading to the core strategy up to 2009 expected to get to this stage a lot earlier, and it has been a big disappointment not to have this earlier. You know, both 2013 but then 2015-16, but I'm glad we didn't agree the 2015-16 because it would have been a dreadful policy. But really pleased the process we've had over this last 2 years. I think we've got a much better document, and to me the two drivers for this document is firstly the green belt boundary and Sheffield's golden frame, and saying, you know, this is the industrial city in the golden frame of the green belt, keeping the green belt boundary. And I think keeping that boundary necessarily means that a lot of the new homes and new workspaces will be in the city centre. And the advantage of that is it helps the policy in terms of the 20-minute neighbourhood. So really pleased to see the greenbelt boundary protected. But I think the other key driver is the climate and biodiversity crisis, and the city setting a target of a net zero target by 2030, which will, you know, as Councillor Gamble-Pugh has said, sets a whole host of challenges in terms of building development. But those are the two key things that drive this plan, and other things come out of that. So really welcome that as a basis. The challenge remains around, you know, getting everybody on board with this and getting developers on board, and particularly this balance about viability, because over the last 20 years we have really struggled to deliver the number of affordable housing that we as members have wanted to see. So we've heard a number of submissions in terms of what is achievable. We've clearly gone for a compromise in terms of affordability, but if, you know, this plan would deliver considerably more affordable housing than the previous, the UDP delivered over the last 25 years, so that's a big step forward. I think in terms of accessibility, I think by having better standards, you know, more new homes will be accessible for disabled people. And I think the push towards reminding everybody at every opportunity we are in a climate and biodiversity crisis, and we need to move to net zero by 2030. So yes, we can't adopt all building standards immediately, but I think this is a much better document than we would have had at any point in the last 15 years. So very pleased with the ambition on that, and on that basis I think this is a good document to go out to the people of Sheffield and to the development community for their views. And as I say, I'm confident that we've got a good document to go out and listen to what they have to say. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Messerow.
Thank you. Thanks very much to officers for such an in-depth report. It's been really useful. I just wanted to follow on from Councillor Shaw's point about bike storage. I'm aware that half of the population own a bike, and I'd really like to see higher targets for both secure storage and parking, because it's a key aspect of modal shift, people having somewhere to store their bikes. We really need to shift away from private cars, because this will mean less land is needed for car storage as well.
Thank you. Chair, we will go away and have a conversation with colleagues in transport around those standards, but the standards that we brought through the plan and the standards that the council standards at this point in time, obviously as time progresses and it's a 17-year plan, I'm entirely sure those standards will adjust in any case, and the plan will adjust accordingly. there's a lot in the plan, and there's a lot of focus in the central area around car parking and the drive for car-free development, with concessions around disability parking, etc. So there's a lot in the plan that the framework of the plan, essentially, the spatial choice is there to sort of help drive modal shift. So we agree completely with the sentiment, and hopefully the document really draws that out. And the standards, like I say, we'll revisit those standards with colleagues to see whether we feel that we could justify an adjustment in the content right this second. But those standards are a point in time for a 15-year plan with 2 years to adoption. So, I mean, those standards will adjust as modal shift is progressed as well.
Thank you. Can I just check where we are with the process for the car-free developments? I know that's coming to our committee at some point soon, isn't it?
Chair, in terms of car-free developments, there's a couple of specific projects that are coming through committee I'm aware of. I think there's one coming through around the mechanism to make sure that developments are car-free, which has been done in the past through planning directors and planning conditions. And I know colleagues in our transportation team at the moment are seeking legal advice around whether actually planning is the right vehicle, excuse the pun, to do that, or actually the right approach to deliver that is through mechanisms that our transport colleagues can deliver in their own right. And that's just really making sure that process is safe and streamlined. I know they're seeking that council view at the moment in terms of that legal advice, and then they'll bring something forward in relation to the best way the council can utilise that mechanism in the future. And as I say, I know that legal discussion's in train at the moment, so I'm sure something will come forward in the new year. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think just picking up on the point, there's something quite important here about how this plan links with what we are doing with active travel, in terms of making sure that when we are, putting active travel schemes in, that we've got the proper storage, secure storage available there. But I think then there is a wider point, perhaps, for this plan in terms of areas of the city where we've already talked about the far north and the south east, where it's going to be some time before the active travel network fully extends and gets out there, or they appreciate work is in progress, that we actually make sure in those areas we have got suitable cycle storage there as well. So it's not just about making sure that it's along the active travel routes, but I think across all of the cities, I do think it is an important point. And if we get those bits right, then we're in a better place when everything does start joining up at whatever point in time that may be. So thank you. I've got Councillor Hurst, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a comment. I really like the adoption of the idea of the 20-minute neighbourhood in this plan, because it seems to make sense. It's something that people can understand, isn't it? And make the plan real. And it also, it's the driver for it links lots of other topic policies together that achieve some strategic visions for us. But it makes it real for people. So that's a very good way of understanding and unlocking this plan. I know we consider individual applications on their merit, but that idea of that 20-minute neighbourhood gives them their place in the whole, driven by the underlying policy. So thank you for that. It does make it real.
And I think it gives people a sense of purpose and community, and we can start re-establishing proper community links. It helps with, the active travel schemes, local economies. I think you're right, Councillor Hurst. It does give a lot back to local people in their own communities and their own identities. Any more comments, questions, members? Anything else officers would like to add? Okay, Councillor Gamble-Pugh, you wanted to make a comment on the recommendations.
Yeah, it was just to check, because when I first read it, I just wanted to see whether it seemed like there was a typo, because recommendation A, it looks as though it's missing the words "of the." endorses the publication of the draft Sheffield plan for the purposes of public consultation. But I just wanted to check, because actually elsewhere in the report, the draft plan is being given the name, the publication draft. And I just wanted to just be clear on that, because if what we're being asked to do is to endorse the publication of this as a draft for public consultation, I've got no qualms about that recommendation. Is that the case? Is it a typo?
I think...
Chair, what I'm asking is, are we being asked to endorse the publication of it, or are we being asked to endorse it?
Right. Yeah, I'm clear now, Chair. Yeah, the title of the plan is the publication draft plan, because that's the stage we're at in the formal legal process. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd thing, but yeah, that's the technical word. So you are being asked to endorse the publication draft Sheffield plan, not publication of the draft Sheffield plan. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm quite happy to endorse the publication of the plan for public consultation, but at the minute we have policy as a group, as a political group of the council and as a local authority to work towards net carbon zero by 2030, which in my view is contradicted by this draft plan, and therefore I feel very uneasy about endorsing the draft with that content as it currently stands.
Thinking about it, is this recommendation actually a little bit premature in the fact that it needs to go to the Strategy and Resources Committee, and have we not got a recommendation about doing that? I'm not. Refers this report to the Strategy and Resources Committee for their consideration in advance of seeking full council's approval of the publication draft plan for the consultation programme and the list of submission documents. So if we are doing that, do we need to... Sarah's going to give us some proper legal advice.
Thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right, it is due to go to Strategy and Resources. Strategy and Resources asked this committee to do, and I don't mean to be disrespectful in this, to do the legwork in terms of this plan, assist officers in bringing a plan forward. So the reason that the recommendations are written in this way, you're basically being asked to refer it to Strategy and Resources with your endorsement. So you're not just saying, here you go, Strategy and Resources, have a look, see what you think. That the officers are asking you to refer it with your endorsement. Obviously, whether you're prepared to do that is entirely up to you, but that's why those two recommendations are in there, because officers are asking you to endorse it, recommend it effectively to Strategy and Resources.
Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Yeah, I think there's a contradiction there between being asked by officers to refer it to send it on to Strategy and Resources and being asked to endorse it. Given the way it's worded, that it's worded as if there's a typo and we're being asked to endorse the publication of the report, I think if that had been clearer, I think there would have been a lot more discussion outside of this meeting. As it stands at the minute, I think without recommendation A, or with the addition of the words of the before draft, I think it's acceptable, but I'm not sure how it can be acceptable to us as it currently stands with the clarification that's just been provided.
Got Councillor Sango, then Councillor Auckland, please.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I think the officers explained the position. This is a publication draft Sheffield plan, and we're being asked to endorse it. Now, I think we've heard today that we've all got various concerns with bits of the detail, and we're also. It's a compromise. Any document is a compromise. It's a cross-party document. It's been a really good process. It's been a very inclusive process. the next stage is to see whether it is sound in the view of the people of Sheffield and the development community in Sheffield. And there'll be a planning inspector to look at that. Now, I'm not saying our colleagues on Strategy and Resources won't look at this from other perspectives and put in some amendments, and that's absolutely right as part of the process. But I'm happy in terms of what we have here, that I'm happy to endorse this as a as a publication draft Sheffield plan, and I think it has been worded correctly in terms of recommendation A. Thanks, Chair.
Can you just give me one moment? I'm trying to look for a solution. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so we can either, and Sarah will pick me up if I've got this wrong, we can either, if we are not completely happy, we can just say we don't agree with recommendation A and it goes without that endorsement. We can say, because we have made a number of comments over the course of this meeting in terms of things that officers have said they're going to take away and look at, so we can spend some time picking back out what those are and adding to the recommendations and putting those in. Have I got any other options? Or agree as it is. So that's where Sarah's coming from at the moment. I know I've got Councillor Rutland, then Councillor Hurst, then Councillor.
Well, first, I don't know if Craig has got a seconder for his proposal to amend the recommendation. That would, I think, be a starting point. Give us more of a clue of, having got to this point, how come we've got sort of a change, whether it's just an argument about being comfortable with the wording of recommendation A. But the second part of recommendation A is for the purpose of public consultation, so it's going to go to strategy and resources and to full council in the end, and there'll be an opportunity for groups to make, or for individual councils to make amendments then. But I had the planning brief way back when I was first elected in 1999. I remember Les Sturch saying to me, Ian, we've got to have a new planning document. We've got to have a new planning document. A suit of policies to put on the shelf, and we've got to start this process. And here we are now, still without something to put forward for the public to have the say, for the public in general, for the people who've worked on the green space designation in my ward, or their own effort, for the developer community. But that's where I want to get to. I was going to be quite happy to vote for the recommendations, Chair, honestly, without picking over it. And I understood it was about the naming of, it's what it's called. We're just being asked to endorse what it's called, so to speak, not exactly what it says. There are bits of it, not exactly would be in my words or possibly in our group's words, but as a basis for going forward, it's a basis for going forward. I'm happy to support it.
Mike?
Chair, just really briefly, it may help. It just in terms of precedent, it's a very similar process we're talking about here to the process we followed with the spatial option, which was the transitional committee considered the 5 options in front of them and put forward an endorsed option, if you like, to the cooperative executive before full council. So I don't know if it adds any comfort to the process that we're trying to follow, but there is precedent in terms of the sort of the route that we're suggesting this goes through.
Councillor Hurst and Councillor Gilligan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My feeling is that we're not being asked to produce a blueprint. We're being asked to endorse a document based on the work that we've done that then goes out for consultation, and we'll have the corners knocked off it, but will be a stage closer towards giving developers, investors in Sheffield, people who want to live and work in Sheffield, and those who want to secure Sheffield's future as a green, healthy, sustainable, vibrant, lively city, the tools that they need. And I do think we recognise there are compromises, and we recognise that those we've had sessions on some of those compromises and talked some of them through. But I don't think at this stage we can say we refuse to endorse that, because what are we then expecting? Are we expecting strategy and resources to do all the months of work that we've put into this? We endorse it as it stands and we send it out for the next stage of its development, I believe, which is public consultation. And then there will be changes that are made following on from that. That's my understanding of the process. And I'm happy because of the journey that we've taken and the discussions that we've had, I'm happy to support the recommendations as they stand. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also happy to endorse the publication draft Sheffield local plan. Similar reasons to Councillor Hurst has just said. We've had a lot of discussion about this, but more importantly, Sheffield needs this plan and we don't really need to be delaying it any further. I think as Councillors Auckland and Sangar referred to, it's been a long time in the making. I also acknowledge Councillor Gamble-Pugh's contradictions about our 2030 plan, but at this stage, I think we need this plan to go forward. I think if we don't have this plan, we're going to get even less of our green and sustainable measures in the planning documentation. So I think this is a really good, solid foundation from which to build, because if we don't have a plan, we don't have any sustainability or affordable housing or anything really, do we? So yeah, I think I'm happy to go ahead.
Thank you. It was helpful to have that conversation because I think it would be nice if we could get the endorsement of the whole of the committee. So thank you for everyone's comments there. I think despite our best efforts, we are left with recommendation A as it stands. So I suppose ultimately, Craig, you're going to have to either give us an alternative and get a seconder or go wherever.
Just to be clear, my objection isn't about progressing with the process of consultation, but I don't feel that on the balance of all of the discussion that we've had, that I can, as an elected member, based on the political policy platform that I've been elected according to, that I can endorse the detail of this plan that contradicts existing policy. If we go to consultation and the general public are happy with it, or it's the best compromise, I don't think we need to hold it up, but I think it's perfectly fine, would be perfectly fine for us to agree all of the other recommendations, because the other recommendations include to endorse the consultation programme, to endorse sending it to strategy and resources, etc., etc., etc. But I don't believe in endorsing something that I don't believe in, so...
Okay, thank you. I am going to go to the vote on them all then. So we will start with recommendation A, which is on page 11. All those in favour, please. And against? Recommendation, just so we are clear. Recommendation A on page 11. All those in favour, please. Against? We have one. So that is carried. No, it's just Craig was against. Oh, and one abstention. Sorry, Ruth, I missed that. Apologies. And recommendation B, which is also on page 11, all those in favour? So that's carried unanimously. And C, recommendation C on page 12, all those in favour? That again is carried unanimously. And D, all those in favour? Thank you, again. And E, again carried unanimously, thank you. And F, carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That is the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance today, but especially thanks to officers for all your hard work getting the plan to this stage, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.